She just wanted to vent about a forbidden dream, but fate hit send in the wrong place and changed her life forever. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Continuing, it was a lazy Sunday with a cloudy sky and reheated coffee in London. Helen Carter, 27 years old, was trying to kill the boredom in her small rented flat in Notting Hill as the fine rain lashed against the windows. Between exchanging messages with her best friend Bianca, she decided to share something that had been rattling around in her head since dawn, a vivid, surreal, and utterly inappropriate dream about her boss. She laughed to herself, embarrassed, but couldn't resist. She grabbed her phone and recorded an audio message with all the details, using that teasing, intimate tone you only share with someone who truly knows you. Bye. You won't believe the dream I had about Gus. It was so real, I woke up sweating. We were in that meeting room, you know the one with the view of the Strand, and he just locked the door and started looking at me in that intense way of his. Helen continued describing every detail, every sensation, every whispered word in the dream with her boss, Gus Albright, the CEO of the marketing agency, where she had worked as a digital project coordinator for 2 years. But, in a tragic and comical slip, her finger slipped, and the audio was sent directly to her boss. Yes, that mysterious, calm, observant, and absurdly attractive man she tried to avoid thinking about outside of work. Upon realizing her mistake, her heart pounded. The world seemed to collapse. She tried to delete it, tried to justify it, tried to pray. Nothing worked. The blue tick confirmed. He had listened. "Oh my God, bye! Answer the phone! I've made a colossal mess!" Helen frantically called her friend while pacing circles around her flat. When Bianca finally answered and learned what had happened, silence preceded an explosion of laughter from the other end of the line. "It's not funny at all. I just threw 2 years of my career down the drain because of a stupid dream and a clumsy finger," Helen yelled, feeling her face burn with shame. "He's going to fire me tomorrow, I'm sure of it, or worse, he'll file a harassment suit. It's over, bye. Everything's over." Bianca, trying to calm her, suggested, "What if you send a message explaining? Say it was a joke, that you were sending it to me." "And make everything even more awkward? He's 36, heir to the country's largest media conglomerate, attends events with ministers and celebrities, and I'm just another employee he barely knows, who he now knows has erotic dreams about him." Helen sank onto the sofa, defeated. "Maybe I won't even show up tomorrow. Maybe I should move to rural Wales and raise goats." The rest of Sunday passed, in growing anguish. Helen checked her phone every minute, waiting for some response from Gus. Nothing. Just the relentless silence that consumed her from within. On Monday, the world didn't end, but it came close. Helen arrived at the office half an hour early, planning to hide at her desk and avoid any eye contact with her boss. Her heart was pounding so hard, it felt like everyone could hear it. The mirrored building in the heart of Canary Wharf housed Albright and Associates, one of the country's most reputable marketing agencies, and Helen had earned her place there with great effort after years of working at smaller companies. The daughter of public school teachers from Reading, she had studied on a scholarship, taken unpaid internships, and worked 3 jobs at once to pay for her advertising degree. That position was her pride, her achievement. And now she was about to lose it over a stupid audio message. At 9 o'clock sharp, as always, Gus Albright walked through the agency's glass doors, greeting employees with his traditional sober "good morning." Helen sank into her chair, pretending to be absorbed in reports. But then the inevitable happened. A message on the internal communication system. "Helen, could you please come to my office now? GA." Helen's legs trembled as she walked down the corridor leading to Gus's office. Her colleagues, oblivious to the unfolding drama, simply continued their daily work. Helen took a deep breath before knocking on the door. "Come in." Gus's deep, controlled voice sounded from the other side. He stood, observing the city through the panoramic window. He wore an impeccable, tailored navy blue suit that contrasted with the gray sky outside. Gus Albright was not just the agency's CEO. He was the youngest son of the Albright family, whose media empire spanned from television channels to news portals. Tall, with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, penetrating dark brown eyes, and an angular face that exuded authority, he intimidated effortlessly. "Close the door, please," he requested, turning to face her. His face revealed absolutely nothing. Helen obeyed, feeling like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. "Helen," he began, his voice surprisingly soft. "About the audio message you sent me yesterday?" "Sir, I'm so sorry. It was a terrible mistake. I was talking to a friend. It was an accident. It wasn't meant for you. I would never—" The words tumbled out in a desperate torrent. Gus raised a hand, interrupting her. "Calm down. I'm not going to fire you because of this," he said, but then his lips curved into an enigmatic smile. Though it was quite creative. Helen felt the blush spread across her face. She wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Don't worry. We all have dreams we can't control," Gus continued, returning to sit behind his imposing dark wooden desk. "Consider the matter forgotten. What concerns me now is the campaign for the National Bank. We have the presentation on Friday, and we need something truly impactful." Helen blinked, confused by the change of subject. Was that it? Was he simply going to ignore the fact that she had shared a detailed erotic dream about the two of them? "Yes, sir. The team is finalizing the last details. I believe the emotional approach we've chosen will resonate well with the target audience," she replied automatically, still stunned. "Excellent. I want to see the final layouts tomorrow," he concluded, returning his attention to his laptop. It was a clear cue for her to leave. Helen nodded and turned to leave, her legs still shaky, when his voice stopped her. "Oh, and Helen—" She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Next time, double-check before sending messages." She couldn't decipher if there was amusement, irony, or a warning in his tone. She merely mumbled a, "Yes, sir," and practically fled the room. The rest of the week passed in a state of growing tension. Helen tried to convince herself that the matter was truly closed, but something had changed. Gus, usually distant and formal, began to pay more attention to her. In meetings, their gazes often met. Once, in the elevator, when they were alone, he asked about her life, about how she had gotten into advertising, showing a personal interest he had never displayed before. And Helen, however much she tried to deny it, felt increasingly attracted to him. It wasn't just Gus's power, money, or classic good looks that fascinated her. It was something in his eyes when he truly listened to someone, the way he respected everyone's ideas on the team regardless of hierarchy, the small gestures of consideration that few noticed. Behind the facade of the cold, calculating executive, she glimpsed a complex and solitary man. The big presentation to the National Bank on Friday was a success. The campaign conceived by Helen's team delighted the bank's executives, securing a multi-million-pound contract for the agency. After the clients left, Gus gathered the team to celebrate with champagne. "You outdid yourselves," he declared, raising his glass. "And a special thanks to Helen, whose creative vision guided us exactly to what the client needed." His eyes met hers over the crystal glass, and Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in that gaze that transcended mere professional appreciation. When the small celebration ended and most of the employees had already left, Helen remained to organize the presentation materials. She was alone in the meeting room when she felt a presence behind her. "You were brilliant today." Gus's voice sounded close, more intimate than usual. Helen turned, finding him just a few steps away. He had taken off his jacket, and his white shirt with the first 2 buttons open revealed the outline of his neck. "Thank you, sir. It was a team effort," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Gus! Off hours, you can call me Gus." He took a step forward. "You deserve more credit than you're giving yourself. I've observed your work these past 2 years. You have a rare talent." Thank you." Helen felt disarmed by the sincere compliment. Gus moved even closer, and Helen could smell his expensive, subtle cologne. "About that audio message," he said, and her heart almost stopped. "I found it fascinating. Please, I've already apologized. Can we just leave it behind?" Helen pleaded, mortified. "But what if I don't want to leave it behind?" Gus asked, his voice rougher. "What if I told you I have similar dreams too?" The air seemed to leave the room. Helen looked at him, incredulous, searching for any sign of mockery or manipulation. But what she saw in his eyes was only raw vulnerability and genuine desire. "That would be inappropriate," she murmured, though her body betrayed her words, leaning imperceptibly towards him. "Completely inappropriate," he agreed, without backing down. "And yet, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since Sunday." The tension between them was almost palpable, electric. Helen knew she should retreat, end that conversation, preserve her professional dignity, but a greater force kept her there, magnetized by the man in front of her. "This can't happen," she stated without much conviction. "I know," Gus nodded, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of nervousness. "I have responsibilities, the company, a position to uphold, and you have your career ahead of you. So we agree." "Completely," he said, but didn't move. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities, with repressed desires. Finally, Gus took a step back. "There's a charity gala event next Saturday organized by the Albright Foundation. The entire marketing and communications sector will be there," he said, resuming a more formal tone, though his eyes still burned. "I hope to see you there." Before Helen could respond, he had already turned and left the room, leaving her alone with her tumultuous thoughts and a heart that beat out of sync. The following Saturday, Helen found herself standing before the mirror, contemplating her reflected image with a mix of anxiety and expectation. The long emerald green satin dress had cost almost half her salary, an extravagance she couldn't afford, but couldn't resist. The flowing fabric hugged her natural curves. The side slit revealed her legs exactly between elegant and provocative, and the bare back added a touch of sophisticated sensuality. Bianca, sitting on the bed watching her friend get ready, whistled in approval. "If the goal is to make the boss drool, mission accomplished," she declared with a mischievous grin. "I still can't believe that after that audio message, you two are in this, whatever this is." "We're not in anything," Helen defended, applying a final layer of red lipstick. "It's just a company event. All employees were invited." "Uh-huh. And you spent a fortune on this dress because I want to make a good impression. Networking by, everyone important in the industry will be there." Bianca rolled her eyes. "Tell me another one. Since that Friday in the meeting room, you haven't talked about anything else besides your boss's intense gaze, how he seemed like a different person when you were alone." "It's complicated, okay?" Helen sighed, sitting next to her friend. "He's my boss. He's 10 years older, comes from a completely different world than mine. His family is practically the British royalty of communications, while my parents are public school teachers. It's a recipe for disaster. Or for a cinematic love story," Bianca argued, adjusting a strand of Helen's dark brown hair that had escaped her elegant bun. "Look, I know you're scared. Ever since Fred, you haven't allowed yourself to feel anything for anyone. But it's been 3 years, Maybe it's time to give your heart a chance again." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her ex-fiancé who had left her a month before their wedding, after discovering he was expecting a child with another woman. The betrayal had destroyed not only her relationship, but her ability to trust. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "It never is. But living is risking." Bianca shrugged, standing up. "Now go rock that party. And tomorrow, I want every dirty detail." The ballroom of the Shard Hotel was unrecognizable, transformed into a setting of glamour and sophistication. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with a soft golden light. Arrangements of white orchids adorned the tables covered with silk tablecloths, and an orchestra played discreetly in a corner. The crème de la crème of London society circulated through the space, women in designer dresses, men in impeccable tuxedos, all there to support the night's charitable cause, education for children from vulnerable communities. Helen immediately felt out of place. Despite the expensive dress, there was something in that environment that screamed she didn't belong. It was the way people greeted each other with familiar kisses and hugs, how they mentioned summer homes in Jersey or recent trips to Paris with the casualness of discussing the weather. Taking a deep breath, she took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began to circulate through the ballroom, looking for familiar faces from the agency. She found some colleagues and joined them, grateful for the anchor of familiarity. That's when she saw him. Gus had just entered, accompanied by a stunning woman in a golden dress with impeccably styled blonde hair. She held his arm with an intimacy that made Helen's stomach clench. "That's Deborah Vance," commented Laura, one of the agency's designers, following Helen's gaze. "Former model, current socialite, heiress to Vance Holdings. They say his family and hers have been trying to arrange this marriage for years." "Are they together?" Helen asked, trying to sound casual as she fought against a wave of disappointment. "Officially, no, but they always appear together at these events. They match, don't they? They look like they stepped out of a luxury perfume commercial." Helen nodded, forcing a smile. Laura was right. Gus and Deborah made a perfect couple, as if they had been molded from the same material. Classic beauty, old money, innate power. Suddenly, she felt foolish for having imagined there could be anything real between her and Gus. What had it been? A moment of weakness on his part? Curiosity about the employee who fantasized about him? The emerald dress seemed to weigh tons on her shoulders. Throughout the evening, Helen deliberately avoided crossing Gus's path. She focused on chatting with colleagues, admiring the charity auction, and applauding the emotional speeches. But she couldn't help her eyes seeking him out. Every few minutes, observing how he circulated through the ballroom with natural elegance, how he greeted important people, always with Deborah by his side. During dinner, Helen was seated at a table far from Gus's, to her relief. She made an effort to participate in the conversation, to laugh at jokes, to seem interested in the stories, but a part of her mind remained fixed on the image of Gus and Deborah, sitting together at the main table, looking like characters from a fairy tale exclusive to the very rich and privileged. When the formal part of the event ended and the dance floor opened, Helen decided it was time to leave. She had fulfilled her social obligation. She had been seen. She had done the minimum necessary networking. Now she just wanted to go home, take off the expensive dress that suddenly felt like an inappropriate costume, and forget all that madness that had started with an accidental audio message. She was collecting her clutch when she felt a presence behind her. Before she even turned around, she knew who it was. His cologne had already become too familiar. "Leaving without saying hello?" Gus's voice was soft, but there was a note of reproach in it. Helen turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Forgive me, sir. The event was crowded. I didn't want to interrupt your important conversations." "Sir, are we back to formalities?" Gus frowned, studying her with those penetrating eyes. And why do I get the impression you were avoiding me all night? Your impression, she replied dryly. I was just respecting your space. Your companion is very beautiful, by the way. A flicker of understanding passed over his face, followed by a restrained smile. Deborah? She's my father's best friend's daughter. We grew up together, practically like siblings. Our families have insisted on this idea of a union for years, but there's never been anything between us beyond friendship. You don't owe me explanations, Helen shrugged, though a treacherous flame of hope had ignited in her chest. I don't, but I want to give them. Gus took a step forward, closing the space between them. You look absolutely stunning in that dress, you know? Green has always been my favorite color. The sincere compliment caught Helen off guard, making her blush. Thank you, she murmured, suddenly aware of every inch of skin exposed by the dress. Dance with me? He asked, extending his hand to her. It wasn't an order, not even a casual request. There was vulnerability in the question, as if he were prepared for rejection. Helen hesitated for a moment that seemed to contain the entire universe. An internal voice screamed all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. He was her boss. They came from completely different worlds. Stories like this always ended badly. But there was another voice, quieter yet stronger, that compelled her to accept that outstretched hand. Just one dance, she conceded, placing her hand in his. Gus smiled, that rare, genuine smile that completely transformed his austere face and led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra played a soft version of an old timeless standard, and several other people danced around them. Still, when Gus's hand rested on her waist and the other intertwined their fingers, Helen felt as if they were completely alone in the world. You have no idea how long I've waited for this, he murmured close to her ear as he guided her with confident steps across the floor. For a dance? Helen tried to sound nonchalant, though her heart pounded, like an uncontrolled drum. For a chance. To be like this with you. Their eyes met, and Helen saw something in them that simultaneously frightened and fascinated her. Desire, yes, but also a raw, almost painful vulnerability. There were more layers to this man than she had imagined. You could have any woman in this room, probably in this entire city, she said, unable to hide the insecurity in her voice. Why would you be interested in me? The question hung between them for a few bars of the music. Gus watched her intensely, as if searching for the answer, within himself. Because you see me, he finally replied, his voice low, almost disappearing beneath the musical notes. Not the Albright heir, not the CEO, not the desirable match families want for their daughters. You see something beyond that, something I can't even explain myself. The sincerity in his words completely disarmed her. The dance continued, their bodies gradually drawing closer, the formal distance diminishing with each movement until Helen could feel the warmth emanating from him, could count the beats of his heart if she wished. The music ended, but they remained for a moment longer than would be, appropriate, connected by something invisible and powerful. It was Helen who broke the spell, taking a step back, aware of the curious glances around them. People are watching, she murmured, suddenly and painfully reminded of who they were, where they were. Let them watch, Gus replied, but allowed her to pull away. Let's get out of here. Where to? Helen asked, confused. Somewhere we can just be a man and a woman, not a CEO and his subordinate. He looked directly into her eyes. No pressure, no expectations, just an honest conversation, outside of this environment, away from stares and assumptions. A part of Helen screamed to refuse, to protect herself, not to allow herself to believe that something like this could work. But another part, the one that had been silenced by years of disappointments and self-preservation, desperately wanted to say yes. I have my car here, she finally said. We can go to a place I know. It's simple but quiet, near Hyde Park. Gus nodded, his face lighting up with a discreet smile. I'll grab my coat and let them know I'm leaving. Meet me at the side entrance in 15 minutes. Helen agreed, feeling simultaneously terrified and exultant, as if she were about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there was water or rocks below. Exactly 15 minutes later, they met at the hotel's side entrance, away from the photographers and important guests. Gus had swapped his tuxedo for a more casual blazer over his white shirt, looking slightly younger, more approachable. Helen led him to her car, a second-hand Mini she had bought after years of saving. She felt a pang of shame mentally comparing it to the luxury cars that surely filled his garage, but Gus got into the passenger seat without any hesitation or comment. "Where are we going?" he asked, seeming curiously relaxed, almost amused by the situation. "It's a small cafe, a bit hidden. It stays open all night. I used to go there when I was studying for my university exams," Helen explained, maneuvering through the night streets of London. "I thought it would be a place where no one would recognize us." "Perfect." The Oakwood Cafe was on a discreet corner a few blocks from Hyde Park. It was an unpretentious establishment, with wooden tables, books piled on makeshift shelves, and a permanent aroma of freshly brewed coffee. At that hour of the night, it was almost empty. Just a few students with open laptops, and an elderly couple conversing in low voices in the corner. They chose a secluded table, near the window that overlooked a small garden lit by fairy lights that remained there all year round. The contrast couldn't have been greater with the luxurious event they had just left, and yet there was something strangely perfect about that transition. "I've never been here," Gus commented, looking around with genuine interest. "It's charming." "It's authentic," Helen smiled. "Nothing here is meant to impress anyone. It just is what it is." A waitress approached, and they ordered coffee and 2 slices of the caramelized banana cake that was the house specialty. When they were alone again, a comfortable silence settled between them. "So," Helen began, finally gathering courage, "what exactly is happening here, between us?" Gus watched her for a long moment before replying. "Honestly, I don't know. I just know that ever since that audio message, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not just its content," he quickly added, "but about you as a person, your voice, the way you defend, your ideas in meetings even when everyone disagrees, the way you treat the cleaning staff with the same respect you treat the directors." Helen felt her face burn. She hadn't expected that level of observation, that attention to the details of her daily behavior. "You were observing me even before the audio message?" It was Gus's turn to look slightly embarrassed. "Yes. More than would be appropriate for a boss, I admit." The waitress returned with their orders, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When they were alone again, Helen gathered the courage for the question that tormented her. "Why did you never say anything? Why wait until an embarrassing accident?" "Because I'm your direct superior. Because the company has strict policies about relationships between employees, especially at different hierarchical levels." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And mainly because I was sure you wouldn't be interested. After all, what would a brilliant and authentic woman like you see in a man like me?" Helen almost choked on her coffee. "A man like you? You're Gus Albright, heir, CEO, probably have your face plastered on some most eligible bachelor's list out there." "Exactly," he interrupted, a shadow crossing his face. "I am a title, a position, an inheritance, rarely just a man. And you—" He looked directly into her eyes. "You are the most genuine person I have ever met. There are no layers, no masks. It is frighteningly liberating and at the same time completely terrifying." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. For the first time, Helen saw beyond the facade of the successful executive, the privileged heir. She saw a man who, despite all his wealth and power, seemed profoundly lonely, enclosed in a gilded cage of expectations and appearances. "So what do we do now?" she asked softly. "I suggest we start slowly, getting to know each other outside of work. No pressure, no expectations." Gus hesitated, then extended his hand across the table, stopping inches from her fingers. "If you want to." Helen looked at that outstretched hand, aware that touching it would mean crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. With a racing heart, she closed the distance, intertwining her fingers with his. "I want to," she replied, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than she had ever felt. In the weeks that followed, they slowly built something neither dared to name. They met discreetly in secluded cafes, in obscure bookstores, in less frequented parks. They talked about books, films, music, discovering with surprise and delight how much they had in common despite their social differences. They spoke about their childhoods, his surrounded by material privileges but lacking genuine affection, hers simple but rich in love and emotional stability. At the office, they maintained a strictly professional facade. No one but them knew about their Sunday strolls through Kew Gardens, their long nightly phone conversations, their first hesitant, sweet kiss in the rain after a cinema date. It was a delicious secret, a bubble of alternative reality that existed only for them. Until, inevitably, the bubble burst. It was a regular Tuesday. Helen was focused at her desk, finalizing a presentation, when she noticed an unusual buzz sweeping through the office. People whispered, cast glances in her direction, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled malice. Her stomach tightened with a bad premonition. Laura, the designer, approached with an expression of discomfort. "Helen, have you seen this?" She discreetly extended her phone. It was the gossip page of an influential news portal. The headline made Helen's blood run cold. "Albright heir in secret romance with employee." Below, a series of grainy photos, clearly taken with a telephoto lens. She and Gus walking hand in hand in the park, chatting intimately in a cafe, sharing a kiss outside the cinema. "My God," Helen murmured, feeling the room spin around her. "Is it true, then?" Laura asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Before Helen could answer, her phone vibrated with a message from Gus. "My office, now." The walk to his office had never seemed so long and tortuous. Every pair of eyes that followed her felt like a judgment, every whisper a condemnation. When she finally entered, she found Gus standing before the window, his back tense, his shoulders rigid. "Close the door," he requested, without turning around. Helen obeyed, her heart pounding in her chest. "Gus, My father called," he interrupted her, finally turning around. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "The photos are circulating in all social circles. The specialized press is already speculating whether our relationship violates company policies, whether you received preferential treatment, whether your position was earned by other means." The insinuation hit her like a slap. "That's absurd. I worked hard for every inch of recognition in this company, long before us, before anything between us." "I know that," Gus sighed, running a hand over his face. "But appearances matter as much as reality in this world. My father is furious. The board is concerned. And He hesitated, his voice faltering slightly. "I'm afraid this will destroy everything you've built." "What are you saying?" Helen asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. "Perhaps it's best we pull back. Give it time to cool down, to protect your reputation, your career." Something cold and heavy settled in Helen's chest. "My reputation or yours? Your position or my career?" Gus's eyes narrowed with pain. "That's not fair." No, it's not, she agreed, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I understood it would be complicated, that we'd have to face obstacles, but I didn't think you'd give up at the first sign of difficulty. I'm not giving up, he protested, taking a step towards her. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Gus. I need a partner who stands by me, not one who unilaterally decides what's best for me. Helen took a deep breath, trying to control her trembling voice. If you want to end this, have the courage to say it clearly. Don't hide behind noble concerns. I don't want to end it, Gus said, his voice low and intense. I never did. But I'm scared, Helen. Scared of what this might cost you. Don't decide for me what I'm willing to risk, she replied, holding firm despite her trembling legs. I'm an adult. I know the risks. The question is, are you willing to face them by my side or not? The question hung between them like an open chasm. Gus closed, his eyes for a moment, as if fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, there was a new resolve in his gaze. I am, if you are. The answer was simple, but laden with meaning. Helen felt an immense relief wash over her, immediately followed by a new wave of anxiety. What do we do now? She asked. We face this together, openly, Gus declared, stepping closer to take her hands in his. No hiding, no secrets. I'll speak with HR, with the legal department, with the board. We will clarify that our relationship began recently, that there was no conflict of interest, that your achievements are solely the result of your talent and dedication. And if they don't believe us, if it's necessary to choose between the company and us? Gus squeezed her hands tighter. Then I will choose you, without hesitation. The words, so simple and direct, struck Helen with overwhelming force. For the first time since that improbable relationship had begun, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it could work. The following days were a whirlwind. As Gus had predicted, the specialized press had a field day with the story. Sensationalist articles speculated about all aspects of the relationship. When it had started, whether Helen had received undue promotions, whether it was just another conquest of the Playboy heir. Her LinkedIn inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, many morbidly curious, some with thinly veiled, indecent proposals. At the agency, glances and whispers followed her everywhere. Some colleagues distanced themselves, fearful of being associated with a potential scandal. Others approached, expressing discreet support. A minority, mainly younger women on the team, seemed almost to admire her, as if she had achieved some extraordinary feat by conquering the boss. But the worst part was the summons to the Human Resources Department. Helen sat before Patricia, the HR director, a woman in her 50s with a permanently indecipherable expression, and answered a series of invasive questions about the beginning of the relationship, about possible favoritism, about her awareness of company policies. Understand, Helen, Patricia explained in a neutral voice. We need to ensure there's been no violation of our code of conduct. Relationships between employees at different hierarchical levels are discouraged precisely to avoid situations like this. I understand, Helen replied firmly, but I can assure you that my relationship with Gus, with Mr. Albright, began only recently, long after my last promotion. There has never been any form of favoritism or undue influence on my work. Even so, Patricia continued, consulting a folder in front of her, to avoid future conflicts of interest, we are considering transferring you to another department, digital marketing perhaps, where you would not be directly subordinate to him. Helen felt a tightening in her chest. Digital marketing meant working with corporate websites, newsletters, and other platforms with low creative impact. It was practically a disguised demotion. That would be a punishment, not a solution, she argued, fighting to keep her voice calm. My track record at the company is exemplary. There has never been any complaint about my performance or professional conduct. It's not a punishment, Helen. It's a precaution. Patricia closed the folder with a sigh. Think of it as an opportunity to demonstrate your worth in a new area, away from any shadow of favoritism. When she left Patricia's office, Helen felt exhausted and defeated. She found Gus waiting in the corridor, his face tense with worry. "How did it go?" he asked in a low voice. "They want to transfer me to digital marketing," she replied, unable to hide her disappointment. "Practically a polite way to sideline me from important projects." Gus's expression hardened. "I'll talk to them. This is absurd." "No," Helen stopped him, placing a hand on his arm. "If you interfere, it will only confirm what everyone is thinking, that I receive special treatment because of our relationship. I need to handle this myself." "Helen, please, Gus. Trust me. I'll handle this my way." He hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to protect her and his respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded. "As you prefer, but know that I'm here, by your side, for whatever you need." Helen smiled, grateful for his understanding, even though her heart was heavy with uncertainties about the future. That night, alone in her flat, Helen contemplated her options. She could accept the transfer, swallow her pride, and try to prove her worth in a new area. She could fight, appealing to higher authorities in the company or even legal resources, alleging discrimination. Or she could simply resign, cut her losses, and start over somewhere else, away from the scrutiny and judging eyes. Each alternative seemed equally painful and unsatisfactory. What bothered her most wasn't the possible reduction in status or responsibility, but the blatant injustice of the situation. If it were a man dating the CEO, would he be treated the same way? Probably not. He would be seen as ambitious, perhaps even admired for his master stroke. Her phone rang, interrupting her gloomy thoughts. It was Bianca. "So, how's Cinderella after the ball?" her friend asked, trying to sound lighthearted despite her obvious concern. Helen let out a tired sigh. "More like Alice in Wonderland of horrors, actually." "That bad?" "Worse." And Helen told her everything. The press articles, the looks at work, the conversation with HR, the transfer proposal. "What a bunch of hypocrites!" Bianca exploded when she finished. "I bet half those executives are having affairs with assistants or interns, but when it's a competent woman who gets involved with someone above her, suddenly they become defenders of corporate morality." "Exactly," Helen agreed, grateful for her friend's supportive indignation. "The worst part is I'm trapped. If I accept the transfer, it's like admitting I did something wrong. If I fight, I become the problematic one. If I leave, it looks like I ran away." "And what does the CEO think of all this?" "Gus wants to interfere, protect, solve everything. But that would only make things worse." Bianca paused thoughtfully. "You know, maybe this is the time to show what kind of man he really is. If he's willing to face his family, the board, society for you, or if in the end he'll choose the most comfortable path." Bianca's words touched on something deep that Helen had been trying to ignore. The fear that when things got really difficult, Gus would opt for the path of least resistance. After all, men like him rarely had to fight for anything in life. Everything came easy, even women. "Do you think he'll give up?" she asked in a low voice, finally verbalizing her greatest fear. "I don't know, Only you can judge that," Bianca sighed. "What I do know is that you deserve someone who fights for you with the same intensity that you fight for yourself. Nothing less." After hanging up, Helen remained sitting in the dark of her flat, her friend's words echoing in her mind. Deep down, she knew that this crisis wasn't just about corporate policies or malicious gossip. It was a test for her relationship, for Gus's character, for her own inner strength. Her phone rang again. It was Gus. "Can I come up?" The simple message caught her by surprise. "You're here?" she replied, confused. "In your building. I needed to see you." Helen hesitated for only a second before replying, "Flat 702. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Helen found a Gus different from the polished executive she was used to seeing. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his face marked by an almost fierce expression of determination. "What happened?" she asked, alarmed by his appearance. "I just had an emergency meeting with the board and my father," he said, entering the flat, "for 3 hours. About us? About everything. About the future of the company, about my responsibilities as heir, about the institutional image." He made air quotes with his fingers, the disdain evident in his voice. "Basically, they gave me an ultimatum. Either I break up with you, or I'll face serious corporate consequences." Helen's heart sank. It was exactly what she feared, the moment when the pressure would become too great, when Gus would be forced to choose between his privileged world and her. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And what did you decide?" Gus stared at her, surprised. "Do you really need to ask?" "Yes, I do," Helen insisted, feeling tears welling in her eyes. "Because I'm not naive, Gus. I know relationships like ours rarely work out. The difference in power, social class, life experience, everything conspires against us. And now, with all this external pressure—" He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and took her face in his hands. "I told them all to go to hell." "What?" Helen blinked, uncertain if she had understood correctly. "I told the board, my father, all of them, that I wouldn't give you up. That if they wanted a CEO who would bow to emotional blackmail and veiled threats, they would have to find someone else." You risked your position for me?" Helen asked, astonished. "I would risk much more," Gus replied with an intensity that left her breathless. "Helen, I've spent my entire life following the path they laid out for me, being who they expected me to be, achieving what they said I should achieve. And then you appeared, with your absurd authenticity, your unpretentious courage, and suddenly nothing else made sense but to be with you." His words hit her like waves, washing away layers of doubt and insecurity. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means we won't hide. We won't apologize. We won't allow them to define our relationship through their distorted lenses." He pulled her closer. "And as for work, I have a different proposal. Not for you to change departments, but to take on the leadership of the new project with BBC One." Helen's eyes widened. The project with BBC One was the biggest contract the agency had secured in years, a multi-platform campaign for the launch of an international series. "But that's huge. People will say I only got it because of you. Let them say it. We know the truth. And the truth is, no one in that agency is more qualified to lead this project than you. Your portfolio, your creative vision, your ability to manage complex teams, all of it speaks for itself." He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Besides, as you yourself said, if it were a man, no one would question it." Helen felt a whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, relief, a renewed respect for this man who, against all odds, seemed to understand her deeply. And something more, something she had tried to contain and rationalize, but which now overflowed uncontrollably. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could contain them. Gus's eyes lit up with an almost childlike joy. "I love you too. Probably ever since that damned audio message that turned my life upside down." They laughed together, and then he kissed her. A kiss different from all the previous ones. Without hesitation, without reservations, just pure abandon and certainty. Later, lying side by side on Helen's small bed, watching the city lights from the apartment window, they talked about the future. Not just the immediate one, with its challenges and obstacles, but the more distant one, which now seemed surprisingly possible. "There will still be resistance," Gus admitted, tracing soft patterns on Helen's arm with his fingers. "My father won't give up easily. He has a very traditional view of how things should be." "I'm ready," Helen replied with a confidence that surprised her. "It won't be the first time I face prejudice or judgment for being who I am or choosing my own path." Gus watched her with thinly veiled admiration. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "I'm not that strong," she confessed, snuggling closer to him. "I just learned that life rarely offers easy paths for people who weren't born with privileges. So you adapt. You develop a tougher skin." "I like your shell," he smiled, kissing her softly, and everything beneath it. The next morning, they arrived at the agency together, not hidden or ashamed, but hand in hand, ready to face whatever came. Gus had called a general meeting, and now, before all the employees gathered in the large common area, he spoke with a clarity and honesty that surprised even Helen. "As you probably already know, Helen and I are in a relationship," he began, his voice calm and firm. "It started recently and unexpectedly for both of us. We understand that this may raise legitimate doubts and concerns about conflicts of interest, and we are committed to addressing these concerns with transparency." He paused, observing the attentive faces before him. "Therefore, we have implemented some structural changes. As of today, Helen will no longer report directly to me, but rather to the creative director, Claudia Mendez. Furthermore, all decisions regarding her career, performance reviews, promotions, salary increases, will be made by an independent committee, without my participation." Helen watched with a mix of pride and gratitude. Gus had thought of everything, finding a path that preserved both the company's integrity and her dignity. "Finally," Gus continued, "I would like to announce that Helen Carter will be the new leader of the project with BBC One. This decision was made by the executive committee based exclusively on her proven track record of creative and managerial excellence." A murmur ran through the room. Helen saw expressions ranging from surprise to indignation, from admiration to envy. But for the first time in days, she didn't care what they thought. She knew her worth. She knew she deserved that opportunity. And now she had a partner who also recognized it. The following weeks were a test of endurance. The official announcement of Helen and Gus's relationship and her appointment as leader of the BBC One project generated exactly the reaction they expected: an explosive mixture of gossip, malicious speculation, and veiled resistance. Within the agency, two groups clearly formed: those who supported the couple, recognizing Helen's genuine talent and the integrity of the decision, and those who saw everything as a scandal, blatant favoritism, proof that personal relationships were still the fastest path to success. Raphael Davies, Client Services Director and former aspirant to lead the BBC One project, became the unofficial representative of this second group. With subtly deprecating comments in meetings and passive-aggressive resistance to ideas proposed by Helen, he made his disapproval clear. "Interesting how some people can climb the career ladder so quickly, isn't it?" he once commented, loud enough for several colleagues to hear, as Helen presented the project timeline. Externally, the situation was no better. The specialized press continued to speculate about the relationship, now with a new angle: alleged favoritism at work. From subordinate to multi-million-pound project leader, the benefits of dating the boss, read a particularly offensive headline from a business portal. Gus's family, especially his father, Albert Albright, maintained a silent but relentless opposition. Weekly calls for Sunday lunches abruptly ceased. Invitations to family events were reduced to the bare minimum of protocol. On one of the rare occasions when Gus took Helen to a family dinner at the imposing Albright mansion in Kensington. The discomfort was palpable. Albert barely spoke a word to Helen, while Gus's mother, Eliza, maintained a stiff smile and superficial conversations about the weather and decor. "Your father hates me," Helen commented on the way back, trying to sound casual despite the evident pain in her voice. "He doesn't know you," Gus replied, squeezing her hand. "He's a man of another generation with fixed ideas about how things should be. Give him time." "Time?" Helen gave a bitter laugh. "I don't think even a lifetime would be enough for him to accept the middle-class project coordinator as a daughter-in-law." Gus didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with a quiet determination. "Then he'll have to learn to live with the disappointment." But it wasn't just external pressures that tested the relationship. As they worked together in the same company, now in an altered dynamic, new challenges arose. Helen, determined to prove her worth regardless of her relationship with Gus, often worked late, sacrificing time together. The stress of the BBC One project, with its tight deadlines and high expectations, frequently left her exhausted and irritable. Gus, in turn, faced his own set of pressures. The company board, though not openly hostile, observed his every move with renewed scrutiny. Meetings with investors became exercises in diplomacy, with veiled questions about his personal stability and commitment to the company's long-term vision. At home, he felt torn between his desire to support Helen's independence and his concern for the visible toll it was taking on her. One particularly tense evening after a difficult client meeting where Raphael had subtly sabotaged some of Helen's ideas, they had their first major argument. "Did you see what he did? He practically told the client my approach was too risky, without foundation." Helen paced back and forth in Gus's flat, where she now spent most nights. "And you didn't say anything." "What did you want me to do? Contradict him in front of the client? That would only reinforce exactly what everyone is saying, that you receive special treatment," Gus argued, frustration evident in his voice. "So the solution is to leave me undefended?" "You are perfectly capable of defending yourself, Helen, and you did it very well, clearly explaining why your approach would work." "It's not about whether I'm capable or not. It's about you, as CEO, allowing a director to openly disrespect a project leader." She stopped, running her hands over her exhausted face. "Sometimes I wonder if you truly understand what I'm facing." Gus's expression hardened. "Do you think I don't understand? That I don't see the looks, don't hear the comments, don't feel the resistance? That I don't lose sleep trying to find an impossible balance between supporting you and not fueling these speculations even further?" "Perhaps that balance doesn't exist," Helen said, her voice suddenly low and tired. "Maybe we're just deluding ourselves, thinking we can make this work." A heavy silence fell between them. Gus watched her for a long moment, the hurt evident in his eyes. "Is that what you think? That we're deluding ourselves?" Helen felt the weight of her own words. It wasn't what she truly believed, but the exhaustion, the constant frustration, the daily battle to prove her worth were taking their toll. "I don't know what to think anymore," she finally admitted. "I just know I'm exhausted, of fighting, of proving, of justifying." Gus crossed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Then let's stop fighting, at least for tonight." He led her to the sofa, where they sat side by side, still holding hands. For a long time they just stayed like that, in silence, letting the physical proximity calm their turbulent emotions. "You know what hurts me most?" Helen finally asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "It's that before, my work was my refuge, the place where I felt competent, respected, where I knew my worth exactly. Now it's a minefield. Every success is attributed to my connection with you. Every failure is seen as proof that I don't deserve to be where I am. Gus felt his heart clench with the vulnerability in her voice. I'm so sorry for that, more than I can express. I'm not blaming you, she quickly clarified. I chose this too, remember? I just didn't expect it to be so draining. What can I do? He asked, the sincerity in his voice undeniable. How can I make this easier for you? Helen thought for a moment. Perhaps we need a clearer line between work and personal life. At the office, we're just colleagues. You don't defend me. You don't intervene. You don't give me special treatment, positive or negative. Let me fight my own battles, even when it's hard to watch. And outside the office? A small smile appeared on her lips. Outside the office, it's just us. No talking about work, no bringing corporate dramas home. Just a man and a woman who, against all odds, fell in love. That I can do, Gus agreed, pulling her closer. Though it won't be easy to watch you struggle without being able to intervene. I never said it would be easy. She rested her head on his shoulder. But perhaps it's necessary. For both of us. The new approach helped, at least temporarily. At work, they maintained a professional distance that, though painful at times, allowed Helen to establish her authority on her own. Outside the office, they created a bubble where only they existed, their dreams, their conversations, their growing love. But the external pressure continued. The BBC One project advanced amidst constant obstacles, some natural to the creative process, others clearly results of the veiled resistance from certain team members. Helen, determined to prove her worth, worked tirelessly, often at the expense of her physical and mental health. It was Bianca who first noticed the worrying signs. During a Sunday lunch, she observed her friend with critical eyes. You look exhausted, more than usual for someone leading a big project. Helen shrugged, distractedly playing with the food on her plate. It's just the final phase of the project. The client presentation is in 2 weeks. It's more than that, Bianca insisted. You've lost weight. You have dark circles that no makeup can hide. And you just checked your phone 3 times in the last 5 minutes. I have responsibilities, an entire team counting on me. And what happens to that team if you collapse from exhaustion? Bianca leaned across the table, her voice softer now. You've always been dedicated, always given your best. But this is self-destruction. The words hit Helen more deeply than she expected. What else can I do? If I fail, it won't just be me who suffers the consequences. It will be confirmation of everything they said, that I don't deserve this position, that I only got it because of Gus. And if you succeed at the cost of your health, your happiness, of your relationship, what kind of victory will that be? The question hung between them, uncomfortably pertinent. Helen had no answer. That night, lying beside Gus, Helen couldn't sleep. Bianca's words echoed in her mind, mixed with the 1,000 details of the project that still needed to be finalized, with the 1,000 small and large battles she still had to fight daily. I can't switch off, she confessed, when she realized Gus was also awake, watching her in the dim light. It's like my brain is stuck in an endless loop. I know, he murmured, gently running his fingers through her hair. I've been watching it happen these past few weeks. I wish I could help. I don't think anyone can, actually, Helen sighed. It's something I need to resolve myself. Find a balance, learn not to internalize the pressures so much. Or perhaps, Gus suggested cautiously, we need to consider more radical changes. Like what? Gus hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking a lot about this, about us, about the impossible situation we've put ourselves in. And perhaps the solution isn't to try to make it work within the current structure. An alarm went off in Helen's mind. She sat up in bed, suddenly alert. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not breaking up with you if that's what you're thinking, Gus quickly clarified, sitting up too. On the contrary, I'm suggesting that perhaps one of us needs to leave the company. You want me to give up my career? Helen asked, her voice rising with indignation. No, of course not. Gus took her hands in his. Actually, I was thinking about myself. You? Helen stared at him, incredulous. Leave your family's company? The position you've worked your entire life to achieve? Work for what exactly? He gave a humorless laugh. To please my father? To meet the expectations of a board that sees numbers, not people? In recent months, I've realized something important. I've never been as happy, as fulfilled, as since you came into my life, and I've never been as unhappy at work as since I had to pretend I don't care about you within those walls. Helen felt her throat tighten with emotion. But it's your family's company, your legacy. Legacies can take many forms, Gus replied, his face soft in the dim light. I've been thinking about something new, a smaller, more innovative agency with different values, a place where talent and merit truly matter more than connections or appearances. Are you serious? Helen asked, her mind reeling with the implications. Starting from scratch? From scratch, but with 15 years of experience, a solid network of contacts, and, if I may say so myself, a respected name in the market. He smiled. Besides, I wouldn't be completely alone. I have a small inheritance from my grandmother that isn't tied to the family business, enough for a modest but solid start. And your father? Your family? Gus's expression became more serious. I won't lie. It would be a significant break. My father would see it as betrayal, disloyalty. It would take time, perhaps years, for that wound to heal, if it ever healed completely. That's a very high price, Gus. And what's the price of continuing as we are? Of watching you consume yourself day after day? Of feeling torn between impossible loyalties? He caressed her face tenderly. Some things are worth the sacrifice, Helen. You are. The tears Helen had been holding back finally overflowed. Never, in her previous relationships, had she felt this level of commitment, this willingness for real sacrifices. It was frightening and extraordinary at the same time. I'm not asking for an answer now, Gus continued softly. It's too big a decision to make in the middle of the night, especially with the BBC One project so close to completion. I just want you to know that I'm thinking about it, that I'm considering real alternatives so we can have a life together without all this constant tension. Helen nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Instead, she leaned in to kiss him, putting everything she couldn't express in words into that kiss. Gratitude, admiration, love. In the following 2 weeks, the idea planted by Gus blossomed in Helen's mind. As she delved into the final details of the BBC One project, part of her mind was constantly exploring the possibilities. A new agency, built from scratch with different values and principles. A place where she could grow without the constant shadow of doubt about her merit. A joint project with the man who had demonstrated, in every possible way, that he valued her above privileges, traditions, and expectations. On the day of the final client presentation, Helen woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. Regardless of today's outcome, she knew what her next step would be. The decision brought an unexpected calm, a renewed confidence that she carried with her to the office. The meeting room was impeccably prepared, banners and printed materials strategically positioned, the digital presentation tested several times, each team member assigned to their specific part. Helen had rehearsed tirelessly, anticipating questions, preparing answers for possible objections. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was the unexpected presence at the meeting. When the BBC One executives arrived, accompanied by their assistants and internal marketing team, there was an additional figure with them, Albert Albright, Gus's father and chairman of the agency's board. Helen felt her stomach sink. Albert never participated in campaign presentations. This was territory exclusive to operational executives. His presence today, specifically at this project, could only mean one thing. He was there to observe her, to assess whether the woman who had seduced his son was truly competent or merely opportunistic. Gus, sitting at the back of the room as they had agreed to prevent his presence from influencing the dynamic, seemed equally surprised and concerned by his father's arrival. They exchanged a brief but charged look, a mix of her determination and his silent support. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helen began when everyone was seated, her voice firm despite her growing nervousness. "It is with great satisfaction that we present today the result of months of dedicated work, not just mine, but of an exceptional team that embraced this campaign with passion and creativity." As the presentation progressed, Helen gradually regained her confidence. She spoke with clarity and conviction about every aspect of the campaign: the central creative concept, the media strategy, the proposed success metrics. She answered questions with precision, never hesitating even when Raphael subtly tried to question some reach projection numbers. Albert Albright observed everything with an impassive expression, occasionally taking notes or whispering something with the BBC One marketing director, with whom he apparently had some prior familiarity. When the formal part of the presentation ended and the BBC One executives began to discuss among themselves in low voices, Helen allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had done her best. The project was solid, innovative without being risky, aligned with the client's objectives without being predictable. If that wasn't enough... "Miss Carter?" Albert Albright's grave voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I ask a question?" The entire room became tense. Everyone knew about the complicated relationship between the chairman of the board and his son's girlfriend. "Certainly, Mr. Albright," Helen replied, maintaining her composure. "This integrated approach, combining traditional media with digital strategies so specific to each audience segment, was that your original idea?" The question seemed like a trap. If Helen claimed all the credit, it could seem arrogant or dishonest, ignoring team contributions. If she shared the credit, it could seem like she didn't have real leadership over the project. The central concept was developed collaboratively. During our brainstorming sessions, she began carefully, but the specific segmentation strategy, especially the regional approach for different British markets, was a direction I strongly advocated for, based on my previous experience with national campaigns. Albert nodded slowly, his face still unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to the BBC One CEO. "Charles, I think you've found exactly what you needed. This campaign has the sophistication your new series deserves, but with the British authenticity that will differentiate it in the international market." A murmur ran through the room. Gus at the back seemed as shocked as everyone else. The BBC One CEO smiled broadly. "I fully agree, Albert. Miss Carter, your team has perfectly captured our vision. Save for some minor adjustments we'll discuss with your team in the coming weeks, we consider the proposal approved." The celebration that followed was restrained in front of the clients, but exploded as soon as they left. The entire team, even those who had been skeptical or resistant, congratulated Helen. The BBC One project was official, an 8-figure contract, the largest the agency had secured in years. Only Albert Albright remained apart, observing the celebration with a thoughtful expression. When the atmosphere began to calm, he approached Helen. "I'd like to speak with you privately, Miss Carter, perhaps in my office." Helen looked at Gus, who had discreetly approached, concern evident on his face. "It's fine," she assured him in a low voice. "I'll handle it." Albert Albright's office occupied the entire top floor of the building, with a panoramic view of London that made the city look like a miniature model. Decorated with antique furniture and valuable British artworks, the space exuded power and tradition. Please sit. Albert indicated an armchair before his imposing desk. When Helen settled in, he remained standing, looking out the window for a long moment. Do you know why I came to your presentation today? I imagined to verify if I was truly capable of leading a project of this magnitude, Helen replied honestly. Albert turned, a thin smile on his lips. Partially, but also because I wanted to understand. Understand what exactly? What my son sees in you. He finally sat, resting his elbows on the desk and intertwining his fingers. Don't misunderstand me. You are obviously an attractive and articulate woman, but Gus has always been surrounded by beautiful and intelligent women. What is different about you? Helen felt a wave of indignation, but repressed it. This was not the time for defensive emotions. Perhaps that's a question you should ask him. I have. He said something about authenticity, about how you don't bow to others' expectations, about how you see beyond the surface. Albert made a vague gesture with his hand. Romantic poetry, in my opinion. But today I began to understand. How so? I saw how you conducted that presentation, how you maintained your composure even when that director, Davies, wasn't it, subtly tried to discredit you, how you gave credit to the team when you could easily have claimed all the merit. He watched her with penetrating eyes, so similar to his son's. I saw a natural leader, someone who earned respect not through fear or intimidation, but through genuine competence. Helen blinked, completely disarmed by what appeared to be a sincere compliment. Don't misunderstand me, Albert continued, leaning back in his chair. I still think your relationship is complicated, possibly imprudent, considering the corporate structure. But I can no longer say it's based on opportunism or infatuation on your part. It never was, Helen affirmed, finding her voice again. I always knew who Gus is. Not the heir, not the CEO, but the man. And it's that man I fell in love with. Not the surname or the bank account. Albert studied her for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. Gus mentioned he's considering leaving the agency, starting his own venture. Helen felt her heart race. He told you about that? Last night. He came to my house, sat down with my wife and me, and laid out his plans, with a conviction I'd never seen in him before. Albert gave a dry, humorless laugh. Am I to assume you support this idea? Actually, Helen replied slowly, I only found out about it recently. It was his idea, not mine. But you're going with him. It wasn't a question. Yes, Helen confirmed, surprising herself with her own certainty. After the BBC One project is stabilized and the transition is smooth for whoever takes my place. You understand what that means, don't you? For him? For the family? I understand it will be painful, that some bridges might be burned, that you will probably see it as betrayal. Helen held his gaze without wavering. But I also understand that sometimes it's necessary to break old patterns to build something new, something authentic. To her surprise, Albert smiled, a tired but genuine smile. You know what's ironic, Miss Carter? That's exactly what I did when I was Gus's age. I left my father's construction company to forge my own path in the world of communications. My father didn't speak to me for 2 years. The revelation caught Helen completely off guard. I didn't know that. Few people know. It's a chapter I prefer not to revisit frequently. Albert stood, walking to a small bar in the corner of the office, where he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Helen before continuing. What I'm trying to say is that I understand the impulse, the need to create your own path, to prove your worth on your own terms. So, you're not furious with him? With us? Furious? No. Disappointed, perhaps. Concerned, certainly. He took a sip of the drink. But also, in a way, proud. It's not easy to leave the comfort of the known, the established power for a personal vision. It requires courage. Helen felt a wave of emotion, relief, gratitude, hope. And what about your wife? How does she feel? Eliza is more practical than I am. She said that as long as you two show up for Sunday lunch at least twice a month, she can forgive almost anything. Albert gave a genuine laugh this time, especially if there's the prospect of grandchildren in the future. Helen almost choked on her whiskey. We're a bit far from that stage yet. Naturally, but my wife is patient, to a point. He put down his glass, returning to a more formal posture. I have a counter-proposal for both of you. Before you make a final decision, I'd like you to consider it. What kind of proposal? Instead of leaving the company completely, Gus could take on the leadership of a new division, focused on emerging markets, operating with considerable autonomy from the rest of the agency. He would choose his own team, define his own culture. You, obviously, would be welcome to be a part of it, though in a position that would not constitute direct subordination. Helen pondered the offer. Why would you do that? Why not simply let him go if you understand the impulse? Because, unlike my father, I've learned some lessons over the years. One of them is that tradition and innovation don't have to be opposing forces. They can complement each other. Albert watched her intensely. And because, despite all our differences, he is my son. And apparently he has chosen you as his partner. That makes you, in a way, part of the family too. When Helen returned downstairs, she found Gus waiting anxiously in the corridor, clearly worried. What happened? What did he say? Are you all right? The questions tumbled out in a torrent. Helen smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. I'm more than all right, and we have a lot to talk about. She looked around the bustling office, where the celebration for the BBC One project continued. But not here. Tonight, just the two of us. That night, in a small Italian restaurant in Notting Hill, where they had had one of their first discreet dates, Helen told Gus about her surprising conversation with Albert, about the unexpected understanding, about the proposal for the new division, about the reluctant but genuine acceptance. I can't believe it, Gus murmured, astonished. I expected any reaction from him, but not this one. I think you underestimate how much he sees himself in you, Helen replied, covering his hand with hers on the table, and how much he truly cares, despite all his rigidity. So, what do you think about his proposal? Is it a better option than starting from scratch, with more resources, more structure, but also with more ties, more expectations? Helen pondered, thoughtful. The question is, could we truly create something of our own within the existing structure, or would we eventually be reabsorbed by the traditional corporate culture? Gus considered the question seriously. With genuine autonomy, we could really make a difference. Show that there's another way to lead, to create, to value talent. He squeezed her hand. But I would only accept if it were a completely shared decision. Your dream, as much as mine. Helen smiled, feeling a deep certainty settle within her. Perhaps the true act of rebellion isn't to leave by slamming the door, but to stay and transform from within. So are we considering his proposal? We are negotiating his proposal, she corrected with a determined smile. With our terms, our conditions, our clear vision of what we want to build. Gus smiled, that rare smile that reached his eyes and lit up his entire face. You are extraordinary, you know, in every possible sense. We are extraordinary together, Helen corrected, leaning in for a soft kiss across the table. And this is just the beginning. 6 months later, Albright Next was officially inaugurated. A new division of Albright & Associates focused on emerging markets, innovative media, and unconventional creative approaches. It occupied 2 floors in the same building as the main agency, but with a distinct visual identity, its own culture, and a team carefully selected by Gus and Helen. As executive creative director, Helen had assembled a diverse team, comprising both experienced talents and promising young individuals from varied backgrounds. Her first hire had been Bianca, who brought her digital marketing expertise to lead the content strategy area. Raphael Davies, surprisingly, requested a transfer to the new division after the resounding success of the BBC One campaign, admitting he had much to learn from Helen's approach. Gus, as president of the division, had negotiated considerable autonomy with the board and his father, including its own budget and freedom to establish internal policies. Among them, radical transparency regarding compensation and promotion criteria, eliminating the gender inequalities common in the sector. On a Friday afternoon, after celebrating the acquisition of another important client, Gus found Helen on the small office balcony, watching the sunset over London. "Thinking about what?" he asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "How we got here," she replied, leaning back against him. "Sometimes it feels like that accidental audio message was yesterday." "The audio message that changed everything," Gus chuckled softly. "Probably the best technological blunder in history. Who would have thought an inappropriate dream and a slippery finger would bring us here?" Helen turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Do you regret anything? The struggles, the stress, the doubts?" "Not for a second," Gus replied without hesitation. "And you?" "Only one thing," she admitted, her expression suddenly serious. "What?" "Not sending that audio message sooner," she completed with a mischievous smile. Gus laughed, pulling her closer. "Well, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As the sun set over the city, they remained embraced, contemplating not only the physical horizon before them, but the metaphorical horizon of possibilities they had created together. A future built not on external expectations or predetermined molds, but on authentic choices, mutual respect, and the kind of love that doesn't retreat in the face of obstacles, but transforms them into stepping stones for something greater, something truly extraordinary.